Hi friends, this is Mrs. Ford again. Today we're going to be talking about human genetics. So in the past, we've discussed Mendelian genetics. We've learned what dominant and recessive means. We've also looked at the cell and where the DNA is located inside of the cell, which is inside the nucleus. So now we're going to apply that knowledge and start talking about human genetics. Okay, as always, feel free to pause the video wherever you need. Make sure that you guys are either taking notes if you're viewing this for the first time or following along in your notes if you are reviewing. Okay. A couple of things I want you to keep in mind as we're working through this PowerPoint. Number one, what is genetics? And number two, I'm assuming that I'm going to have to probably do a part 2 to this lecture. So we will look at essential question number 2 in that part 2 video. But the question is, how are Punnett squares used to describe the genetic relationship between parent to offspring? Okay. Okay, so genetics, as we know, is the study of heredity. In genetics, genes are passed from parent to offspring. So, like you get half of your genes from mom, half from dad. And genes are inherited through sexual reproduction. Genes can express very specific traits or characteristics. So again, there could be things like eye color, hair color, height. Could be whether you can roll your tongue or not, whether your earlobes are attached or not. So genes can express themselves through these very specific traits. Okay. Image here on the left shows, it's just like a little review of what we've already learned. So this whole section here, this is the cell. Inside the cell, we have a nucleus. Within the nucleus, that's where the chromosomes live. And then if we were to unwind the chromosomes, we would, and zoom in a lot, we would be able to see the strand of DNA. And if we take just a section of that strand of DNA, that would be a gene. Or so basically what this is saying is that this whole section of DNA is coding for the same gene. These are the instructions for, let's say, height, or the instructions for hair color. Okay, so if you haven't added it already, make sure you add chromosomes to your glossary at the beginning of this unit, since it is highlighted. Make sure to include the page number in your where this page is at in your notebook. So chromosomes are found in the nucleus of a cell and they carry genes. Genes, once again, another vocab word. Make sure you add it to your glossary. Genes are segments of DNA on a chromosome. So again, segment of DNA within the chromosome. We're just zoomed in way far here. So segments of DNA on a chromosome and are responsible for inherited traits. Again, these are your instructions for what traits you're going to have. Some more vocabulary that we want to make sure we add to our glossary. First word is genotype. Genotype is the genetic makeup of an organism. So here we have, this is supposed to be a chromosome, okay? And we have two chromosomes here, and we have some gene pairs selected. So these top two brown sections are, I'm assuming, coding for the same gene. This silver section or the gray section here, that is coding for the same gene, so on and so forth. So your genotype, and this is an example, here. The genotype tells you what type of genes you have. So it tells you whether you're going to have dominant or recessive genes. It tells you what type of genes you'll have. And that'll make a little more sense here in just a moment. The next vocab word is phenotype. So phenotype is the appearance of an organism based on its genotype plus environmental factors. So the genotype is your actual genes. It tells you whether you have a dominant or recessive gene. It tells you if you got a dominant or recessive from mom. It tells us if we got a dominant or recessive gene from dad. And then when you put your genotype together, then you are left with your phenotype. Your phenotype is what you can see. So it's the appearance of an organism. So an example of phenotype could be eye color. Blue eyes. Blue eyes is a phenotype. Green eyes is also a phenotype. Brown eyes is a phenotype. It could also be hair color. Black hair, brown hair, blonde hair. It's what it looks like. Okay. So in this example here, the phenotype I'm assuming they're coding for the brown colored fur. So brown fur on the mouse would be the phenotype. Okay, some more vocab. Make sure we add to our glossary. Alleles. Now, I've had students in the past want to pronounce this alleles. That's not how you pronounce it. It's pronounced alleles. And alleles are variants or differences in a gene. Okay? So let's think back to Gregor Mendel and his pea plant experiments. He was looking at purple and white flowers. Now, here on these chromosomes, it says that we have, over here, we have a gene for purple flowers, or it says allele for purple flowers, and we have an allele for white flowers. Now, these are genes. This is a gene pair, but we can use the word allele to describe them because we're showing that they are different. We're showing that there are different varieties or just differences within a gene. So an allele, if we're talking about hair color, would be, we could have an allele for black hair, brown hair, blonde hair. We have lots of different options that we can have for hair color. So alleles occur on a fixed spot on a chromosome. Okay. And some more examples. An allele might indicate blood type, which we'll talk about later, color blindness, or a just endless amount of other traits. Alrighty. So dominant recessive, this should be something that sounds familiar to you. So dominant recessive, this will describe how likely it is for a certain phenotype or for certain phenotype traits to be passed down from parent to offspring. So again, if two people were to have a child, what are the chances that their offspring would have blue eyes? What are the chances that their offspring would have brown eyes? And dominant alleles show their effect with only one copy of the allele. I think we talked about this when we talked about Mendel, is dominant alleles, they dominate, right? They take over. So if the dominant allele, the big bully allele, is present, then that's going to be the one that is shown. So if we have recessive allele for blue eyes and a dominant allele for brown eyes, and these two people had an offspring, their child would have brown eyes because brown eyes is dominant. Brown eyes is present, and it's going to tell the blue recessive allele, hey, look, I'm going to take over. I'm much stronger than you. And then the child will have brown eyes. Recessive alleles will only show their effect if the dominant allele is not around. So in